Okay, on my end, it's showing 6:30. If everybody is ready for me to hit start, it is the broadcast has started, okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Great, thank you.
You guys will let me know when we're good to go. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. So welcome to this evening's Committee of Adjustment meeting. Members of the public, applicants, agents, and staff may be participating this evening either in person or virtually via Zoom. For those attending via Zoom, please note that it is our standard practice for members of the public to have their cameras off and microphones muted until it is time for the member to speak. Township staff can assist with muting microphones. If you require assistance, please use the chat function and ask staff. I am also pleased to advise that this is being broadcast live on the Township's YouTube channel, where a recording of this meeting will be available. Note the Township does not have the ability to edit the live stream or record versions of the meeting. So public meetings have been called and notice circulated in accordance with the Planning Act with respect to applications for minor variance and/or consent. The purpose of public meetings are to inform and provide the public with an opportunity to ask questions and express views with respect to the applications. The format of the public meeting is as follows. Township staff will explain the purpose of the application and report all correspondence received. Next, the applicant will present any further relevant information. Next, the public will be permitted to ask questions and express views on the proposal, and then the public portion of the meeting will be closed. And next, members of the committee will be given an opportunity to ask questions for clarification of the application. After all comments have been received, the committee will consider the application with due regard to the presentations and views expressed this evening. The committee will then do one of three things. 1, approve the application. 2, deny the application, or 3, defer the application pending receipt of additional information. Specified persons who have provided oral submissions or written objections but disagree with the committee's decision on an application may appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal as entitled under the Planning Act. The deadline for an appeal of consent application is 20 days within the giving of the notice, and for minor variances within 20 days of the decision date. When commenting on an application, please give your full name and address for the minutes. Please note that the names and addresses of those individuals who speak at this meeting will appear within the meeting minutes, which are public documents. If you wish to receive a copy of a decision, please leave your name and address with the township staff. So I'm moving on to item number B on our agenda. Are there any committee members that want to disclose pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none, I'm going to move on. I have a call for a motion for the adoption of the minutes. So I have a motion COA 2023-001. Is there, okay, it's going to be moved by member Banks and second by member Jones, that the minutes of the November 8, 2022 Committee of Adjustment meeting be adopted as printed and distributed. I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor? Passed. There is, moving on through our agenda, there's no adjourned applications. So moving on to item number D, new applications. Would township staff briefly introduce the application and report on any written response to the notice circulated for new application identified as D1, which is an application for consent identified as B-18-22, and application for minor variance identified as A-32-22.
Thank you, Chair. So as mentioned, our first applications this evening are consent and minor variance applications B-18-22 and A-32-22, Bossini Inc. and 2676425 Ontario Inc., located at 3739 Wood Avenue. So here we have a key map of the subject property outlined in red. It is located on the in the West Shore settlement area adjacent to Lake Couchiching. Here we have the 2022 aerial imagery. Again, the subject lands are outlined in red. The adjacent land uses are noted in yellow, being vacant residential lands to the north, some shoreline residential to the south, and residential lands to the west. Just for context, planning staff have identified over top of this aerial imagery the waste, water, and water infrastructure that is located within the road allowance, along with the approximate maintenance limits of what is known as Wood Avenue here in the red dashed lines. So in summary of the application, the lands as mentioned are located within the West Shore settlement area. It is proposed that the existing lot would be severed to create 2 new residential lots, with 1 retained for a total of 3 residential lots. Planning staff do have significant concerns with the applications with respect to appropriate servicing and road access. The lands do not entirely front on a year-round publicly maintained road. So planning staff are of the opinion that the applications are not consistent with the PPS and do not conform to the growth plan or the official plans of the county and township. So here we have a severance sketch that was provided by the applicant. So you can see the full limits of the property being the outside bounds here. And then the property is proposed to be severed into 3 lots, each with approximately 10 meters of frontage, some a little less, some a little more, onto the Wood Avenue road allowance. So just in summary of the consent applications, it does propose 3 lots, lots A, B, and C, with the proposed frontages and the proposed areas noted here in the table. Table 2 here summarizes the minor variances that are requested. Variances are requested because there is deficient lot area proposed for lots A and B, and deficient frontages proposed for lots A, B, and C. Further, the applicants did request some site-specific minor variances for the proposed severed lands, being reduced interior side yards, along with an increased maximum building height. So here we have some of the site photos that were taken by staff during the site visit. The larger photo here is taken standing within the road allowance looking in at the property. So you can see the existing dwelling that is proposed or would be proposed to be demolished, along with the existing driveway. I just want to point out to the committee that just past this driveway is the approximate maintenance limits of Wood Avenue. Not the entire road. The road doesn't extend throughout the entire road allowance. So despite the municipality owning property there, that portion of the road is not maintained year round. Again, just another photo looking in at the property from the road. This picture here more clearly shows those defined maintenance limits within the road allowance just north of the existing entrance. And this photo here shows all of the above grade utilities infrastructure. There's a sampling station, a pumping station that are all located within the road allowance that would make it challenging to access the properties. So as detailed within the staff report, township staff do have concerns with the proposal related to servicing, access, and future development. The staff report did recommend denial of the applications. However, we have a slightly revised recommendation from staff this evening, which I will get into in just a moment. I did want to point out to the committee that the Fire and Emergency Services and the Public Works Department are not supportive of the application as currently proposed. We did receive a request from the applicant's agent this week requesting deferral of the application to allow for a meeting to occur between township staff and the applicant and their agents. Staff are supportive of that request and would recommend that the committee defer the application this evening. So that concludes my presentation. I do have a recommended motion if the committee wants to hear that afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Mr. Theodore here this evening joining via Zoom? Yep. Mr. Theodore, do you have anything further to add to the application? You can please unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you'd like. And if you also have a presentation, you're able to share your screen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I do have a presentation, but I won't be presenting that tonight. As mentioned by Mr. Oster, we've requested a deferral. We did not initially understand the extent of the servicing and access issues until we had an opportunity to review the staff report. We believe that there's a solution forward. Working with both Public Works and Fire to resolve that, and we wanted to take that time. So we're supportive of staff's recommendation for the deferral, and we look forward to working with staff to try and find a solution before coming back to this committee. Hope that you can support that deferral.
Thanks very much. Sorry, I was having some mute issues. Because it's a public meeting, we'll just continue on. So are there any persons who have either questions or wish to speak in favor or in opposition to the application? If there are, please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to report or asked to respond to each party when commenting. Continue to give your name and address for the minutes. So I don't know if there's anybody. Oh, you have several questions? Okay, come on up and join us. You can, yeah, just yeah, it might be better just to sit in that chair probably and just, yeah.
Okay.
Hey there.
Okay. Good evening, members of the council. I'm Rob Rice with 2481 Point Rosa Vista, which is directly across from the existing house on 3739 Wood. I just had a couple of quick questions for you. Watching the information on screen, am I correct in assuming that the proposed area for the houses to be put would be on the western side of the existing house? What direction would the front of the house would be facing? Where is the entrance and exit to be? Would it be off Wood Avenue or would it be off Point Rosa Vista, which is a private road? And Severn has no responsibility for upkeeping it. But in the event that it would open there, would there be some type of help with helping the road? Because my wife and I, we've sustained the road for the last 5 years, and it's a losing battle. Also, will this interrupt in any way right to sunshine or just enjoying our life? And would this in any way increase house taxes? That's all I have. Thank you for your time.
That's a number of questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot back to Mr. Theodore, and he can lead us through some of the answers to those questions. Mr. Theodore.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I may need some assistance because it was hard hearing that speaker. I did hear the concern as it related to maintenance of the road. And I think through our discussions with staff, understanding probably and where we think we're going is this road will likely need to be upgraded. It may be as a result of this application, in which case we would take it to a level in which it would be municipally maintained. With respect to the concern as it related to shadows, as noted in the question of where the dwellings were located, the dwellings are positioned close to the street. So they have quite long rear yard setbacks, and their height is still within, even though it's seeking a minor variance, it's still generally within the height requirements that the bylaw permits for any dwelling that wishes that they will be redeveloped. So it's still in keeping with that general intent of bylaw requirements. And I'm not sure I heard if there was I didn't hear all of the comments. I apologize, but if there's any other, I wouldn't mind responding to them if the committee can share them with me.
So I know there was a couple. I think it's determined that the interest is going to be off of Wood Avenue, which I believe that was one of them.
That's correct.
That the properties were going to be closer to the road than probably what the existing house is. So there'd be a larger rear setback.
Correct.
Then you talked about the sunshine and interruption. That was there anything else? Taxes is a very difficult thing to do, but the impacts from a tax base won't be on your property. Of these
typically questions that relates to taxes are not a planning matter.
Yeah.
But these properties will pay taxes.
Yeah. And was there anything else on your list that? Okay, that's good. So is there anybody else out there other than Mr. Rice here that had questions or comments? There are?
Yeah, sorry, it's Claudio Nasturgio, 2491 Point Carrazza Vista.
Okay, you're just gonna have to say your name again, I believe, unless someone can let me know they got it.
I did get it.
Okay, and you got the address?
I didn't hear the address, unfortunately.
2491 Point Carrazza Vista.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
So just a comment, looking at the diagram and the proposed diagram from the developer, I understand there's a variance being requested for 2 building lots and then a third. I'm not naive enough to think that eventually a third home will go in there. So in effect, we're creating 3 bowling alleys. So when we talk about, or when we look at the provincial policy statement, safety is a concern. So one of the questions that I want to raise, and I know the committee's also stated concerns with the municipal services that are at the end of Wood Avenue. Where's overflow parking going to be? Is it going to be on Wood Avenue? That's a question that I would have for the developer, because they're certainly not going to park cars between the homes or in the back, because there's going to be no access. And let's not be naive enough to think there won't be a need for overflow parking. I know that especially in the summer months, we routinely have family and friends over. So that will happen. And that's a question that I would, concern that I would have with respect to safety. That road right now doesn't have a turnaround possibility. Municipal vehicles that come down that road have to back up. So if you've got cars and overflow parking on Wood Avenue, that's going to complicate things for them and create exposure. So that's a concern that I would have. And that's something that I think we need to consider.
Sorry, you're gonna have to just bear with me with this mute button.
So the question would would be overflow parking. What's the provision for that?
I think we got the question. We're going to pivot back over to Mr. Theodore.
Thank you for the question. So I guess with respect to overflow parking, like any other property on venue, anyone who decided to have an event at their property, there would likely be on-street parking that may occur on a temporary basis, but not something that's expected to happen occasionally. What I can tell you on each property is that it is a double car garage, so which permits 2 cars within the garage, and there's space for 2 cars within the driveway. That's double the bylaw requirement for parking on each one of these properties. So the proposal is doing more than what the bylaw requires, and there's no variance being sought for parking. In addition to that, the driveways have been offset to allow for on-street parking on Wood Avenue. And that was done on purpose to provide for that opportunity in addition to what's being provided on site.
But when you say on Wood Avenue, whereabouts, right in front of the properties? That
would be between the properties, correct.
That's going to be a challenge. I don't know how we do that. But the other comment I'd like to make, I hear you as far as garages are concerned, but I know very few people that use their garages for parking. That's just a comment that I'll make. Right?
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I do know of that circumstance, and at the very least, there's an ability to, if someone decides to use part of the garage for storage, there's an ability to at least have 1 car space, and if not, you still have 2 spaces for parking within the driveway. which is what the bylaw requires.
While I've got the audience on the phone, I know there'll be others on the call talking about the environmental impact to that sensitive area that it abuts, the canal and the wetland behind. I just want to comment, that property was vacant for 1.5 years before being leased. In that 1.5 years, it's amazing how quickly nature can recover. And in that 1.5 years, we saw the local wildlife in the area flourish. And I just want to make a comment on two things. The one thing that we haven't noticed for quite a long time, and we've had a local contractor who has a home on Menoke Beach. He's got, and family members there as well. He's got 150 feet of shoreline. And we contracted him this summer to do some work for us. And there was an explosion of a frog population that we noticed. And his comment to me was, I can't believe the frogs that you have here. We haven't seen a frog at our place in decades. The other thing I'll comment on is snapping turtles. Over the last 2 years, the amount of snapping turtles that were hatched from that canal that came across our driveway that we helped into the lake was phenomenal. So the only point I'm trying to make is, from an environmental impact perspective, that land is critical for the health of the lake and just for the local wildlife. What provisions are going to be put in place to protect that and ensure that we don't damage that? Because as we know, nature is pretty sensitive, right? And it wasn't until we saw 1.5 years of vacant land, essentially, that we saw recovery there. And I'd hate to see us exposed.
Mr. Theodore, I'll pivot back to you.
Sure. So for clarity, and just so that we're clear on the facts, this is a property that's designated for residential development. It's zoned for that purpose as well. I apologize. You can probably hear my dog in the background. Just trying to calm her. There are no environmental overlays or environmental restrictions on the property as such. It's no different than any other property in Wood Avenue. And if those properties had not developed or had let vegetation grown over time, I'm sure those owners would not want their properties to be deemed an environmental feature to which they could not improve upon it. What I can tell you is, like, we'll take back that comment because we've requested a deferral and look at what sustainable features can be added to this development to ensure its proximity to Lake Couchiching and matters such as infiltration are at the utmost priority to the proposal. But the simple fact that the dwellings have been set as far back from the lake as possible, and recognizing that we would need a permit anyways to access any improved dock or any component along the lake, that's a component that we would have to get approval from the township. So there are checks and balances in place, but for clarity, this is not an environmental protection property. It's not designated. There are no environmental features that would suggest that it requires a heightened priority protection.
Thank you, Mr. Theodore. Is there any other persons that have questions with regards to this application? I'm going to just pivot over to the township staff because I don't know if there's anybody there or not.
Thank you, Chair. We did have some other members of the public register for this evening. Robin Seligman.
Robin, are you there?
I am, but I'm observing at this stage and look forward to hearing what the next solution is.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Mary Germana Carraza.
Mary, you there?
I'm here, and I as well have been listening. We are directly adjacent to the property, and we do have a lot of concerns with drainage, with environmental, and with parking and traffic flow, as well as sewer and sewage. We've had a lot of water issues, flooding issues, different things like that. So I too, like Robin, wait to see what the decision is, because we 100% disagree with what's going on. I think it's way too much for the small area that it is, and it's a very congested little pocket as it is.
Okay.
That's my comments.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on.
Claudio Nasturizio.
Claudio.
No, I'd already, I'm fine with the questions asked, and I'll look forward to the new solution as well.
Okay, thank you.
Ellison Wright.
Allison,
Hello.
how are you?
Good, thanks. I appreciate everything that's been said, and I also am very opposed to what is being proposed. So I look forward to hearing what the new application will be. So I will hold off on any comments at this time.
Okay, thank you very much.
The last person on the list is Mr. Robert Rice, but he's in attendance this evening and spoke in person.
Perfect. Perfect. That's good. A lot of interest. That's good. Because there's no more, if there are no further questions or comments, I declare the public portion of the application is closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide any comments on this application? Member Banks.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is, I wanted to understand, I understand that through a recent legal opinion obtained from the township, it's advised that council does not have the authority to require a pre-screening process. And I want to know whether the developer, in fact, does have access to the pre-screening process through council and planning development.
Thank you. I'm going to pivot over to Mr. Oster. He's having the same type of mute issues that I'm having. Growing pains.
So sorry guys, I'm gonna jump in quick. I can't see, but whoever just from the committee just spoke.
Who's Member Banks? Member Banks.
Thank you. Can you repeat what you said? I'm sorry, I'm getting a couple people messaging that we can't hear you very well. Sorry. It's a little bit tricky on my end.
Hello, can you hear me now? I've got two questions. One is I want to understand, I understand that through a recent legal opinion obtained from the township, it was advised that council does not have the authority to require a pre-screening process. And I want to understand whether the developer does in fact have access to this pre-screening process. I guess that would come from the Council and Planning and Development Committee.
Did you get that?
That was great. Thank you.
This is going to be painful on the mute buttons here. Mr. Brad, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So the township's official plan does establish those policies to consider a pre-screening process. However, the township's bylaws that were passed establishing the committee didn't withhold that permission. So the applicant may have access to that. However, they do not, or they are not required to go through that pre-screening process to bring an application such as this before the committee.
Thank you. And Member Banks, you had another question?
My second question is this application, is it appropriate for this application to be a consent application, or would it be better suited to be a plan of subdivision since there's 3 properties requested?
I'm going to pivot this question back over to the township staff.
Through the chair to Member Banks. That's a great question. That's one of the considerations that staff took into account when preparing our report. And I believe that some of those matters, would be items that would be discussed during these meetings with the applicant and township staff, should the committee choose to defer the application this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any members have questions or comments with regards to this application? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to suggest that if the committee also wanted, they could request that notice be given of this application again, should it return to the committee.
Yeah, thanks. that was something that I was going to address soon. So because we're following the agenda, could township staff please read any conditions or provide any further comments? Nope. Okay, so like township staff had indicated, I think it's important that we as a committee allow the public the option to discuss this application when it comes back again, if we defer it tonight. So hoping that can be added to a motion on the fly, if the committee's in support of that. Okay, this is it's been great hearing the number of people. It's been a long time since there's been 5 or 6 people to speak on an application. So hearing that, I'm going to call for a motion for a deferral for this application. Motion COA 2023-002, moved by member Detta, second by member Banks, that the applications B18-22 and A-32-22 be adjourned to a future committee of adjustment meeting pending more information, and the notice be recirculated for the applications. So I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor? Carried. So the hearing for this application is now closed. Mr. Theodore, you're free to stay for the remainder of the meeting or leave as the committee moves on to the next application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Have a good night. So moving on in the agenda, would township staff briefly introduce the application and report on any written response to the notice circulated for application identified as consent, application for consent identified as B-19-22.
Thank you, Chair. The next application on our agenda this evening is B-19-22, contemplating a lot adjustment or boundary adjustment located at 1697 Heron Drive in the rural settlement area of Pizarton. This is a map of the subject property. As you can see, the subject lands are the larger portion here, being 1697 Heron Drive. The benefiting property is located and indicated in the stripes, being 1721 Heron Drive. Both lots are currently zoned residential 1 and are both developed with single detached dwellings and associated residential accessory structures. The lands are located within proximity to the Matchedash Bay provincially significant wetland, and both do appear to contain mapped MNRF unevaluated wetlands. The purpose of the application, again, is to facilitate the conveyance of a vacant portion of land from the irregular shaped property, being the subject lands, to merge with the rear of the benefiting property as a lot addition. Each lot would retain their own single detached dwelling, and no new lot would be created as a result of this application. As described within the staff report, the table on this screen here describes the current lot statistics as well as the proposed lot addition. Essentially, the applicants are looking to propose to sever a 0.9 hectare or 2.2 acre portion of the subject property to merge with the benefiting lands. The portion that's proposed to be transferred between the properties does not have any frontage on any municipal road allowance, so the frontage of either lot would not be impacted as a result of this application. It was brought to the attention of staff that the public notice for the application was incorrectly advertised with the incorrect size of lands being transferred between the properties. However, the staff report does contain the correct information. The true amount that that is being transferred between lands is lesser than the amount that was advertised on the public notice. So the notice requirements of the Planning Act are still met with this application. So this is the proposed lot addition sketch provided by the applicants. So the subject property is outlined in this bold line here. And essentially the result of the lot addition would be this light yellow portion here, and this remainder of the subject property, the retained lands, being this deep yellow here. Outlined on the screen, you can see these sort of irregular shapes. These are the locations or approximate locations of the mapped unevaluated wetlands that are on the subject properties, both the benefiting and the subject, sorry. These are the aerial imagery. So as you can see, the proposed lot lines or lot adjustments, the lot lines themselves would not further fragment the wetlands on the subject properties. They would actually consolidate them to either parcel. The applicants have provided a letter of opinion that speaks to this matter from Terrastory Consulting, indicating that the proposal, in their opinion, is no threat or risk to the wetlands. So as described within the staff report, the wetlands are not currently environmentally protected underneath the zoning bylaw and the environmental protection zone. So regardless of this application, any individual subject to applicable permits at this time could proceed to build within the wetlands. So this application doesn't necessarily affect the development potential of the property. And although it is in proximity to Matchedash Bay, as you can see on the aerial imagery here, there is significant development between the subject properties and Matchedash Bay. So it is reasonable to conclude that no additional impacts would result from this application. The lands are located within a settlement area. So that being said, it is always important to consider the efficient and orderly use of the lands. The proposed lot addition would result in a more orderly developed form as depicted on the original consent sketch here. Staff do note that due to the development patterns of adjacent lands, as well as the Trans-Canada Trail and rear development, this does appear to be the most efficient use of the property. It's not going to restrict any future development potential or change the development potential of the properties. It would just be a transfer of lands between the two properties, creating that orderly form. So again, these are site photos of the subject property. Upon conduction of a site inspection, it was noticed that the subject lands do appear to be in a state of non-compliance with the zoning bylaw as it speaks to the number of accessory structures. So as a condition for committee's consideration this evening is that the applicants demonstrate compliance with the zoning bylaw for a provisional approval subject to committee's consideration. So as detailed within the staff report, the proposal does appear to meet the requirements of the Planning Act in terms of the PPS, the growth plan, the county and township official plans, and the zoning bylaw. And again, with that additional consideration with the compliance of the zoning bylaw regarding accessory structures. No comments or objections have been received from any internal departments or agencies or public comment. So that being said, the Planning and Development Department has no objections to the provisional approval of the application, subject to those conditions included within the staff report. So I can briefly go over those now. It's a little small on the screen in here, but these are all the standard conditions associated with a lot addition. So the reference plan required, the copy of the in preparation draft deed, that the land shall merge and not be separately conveyable from the benefiting property, and that the owner's solicitor shall provide an undertaking that that does occur. Municipal taxes must be paid in full. The owners demonstrate compliance with the zoning bylaw, and the applicant agrees that all fees and disbursements must be paid by the applicant, and that underneath the Planning Act, they have 2 years to complete these conditions as the date of the decision. But that's all I have to speak to this application. I do believe the applicant's agents are attending this evening via Zoom, so they may wish to speak to the application as well.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody from Morgan Planning and Development that would like to speak? You are good to proceed.
Good evening, committee. My name is Lauren Arsenault. I'm a junior planner with Morgan Planning and Development. I'm here with my colleague, senior planner Victoria Lemieux, and we are available to answer any questions that you may have after our presentation. I will just get that set up now. Share my screen.
Just so you know, we can see it. So
you can see, great. Thank you very much to Ms. Heil for the detailed presentation. I will try to be quick with mine. Morgan Planning and Development has prepared a planning justification report on behalf of Catherine Westfall, owner of 1697 Heron Drive, in support of a lot boundary adjustment with abutting parcel 1721 Heron Drive. Subject property is located within the Fesserton settlement area, northwest of Coldwater and east of County Road 16. Both the benefiting and severed lands are developed with single detached dwelling units and are privately serviced. And as Ms. Heil mentioned, the subject lands are in close proximity to provincially significant wetlands, the Matchedash Bay wetland, and they have 2 unevaluated wetlands mapped within their boundaries. The properties are designated settlements and settlement living within the County of Simcoe's official plan and Township of Severn's official plan, respectively. The properties are zoned R1 within the Township of Severn zoning bylaw, which requires the minimum lot area of 4,000 meters squared and 60 meters of frontage. The subject property, 1697 Heron Drive, does not comply with the minimum required lot frontage for a privately serviced lot within the R1 zone and would be considered legal non-complying. The lot frontage of the benefiting lands and the lot area for both parcels comply with the R1 zone requirements. And I will note that the existing lot frontages are not proposed to be modified through the boundary adjustment. The purpose of the consent application is to convey approximately 0.9 hectares or 2.2 acres from the rear northwest portion of the subject lands, 1797 Heron Drive, and add them to the abutting property at 1721 Heron Drive. And this will increase the total lot area of 1721 and balance the rear woodlot between both properties. So here is the existing lot fabric. Here is the proposed lot fabric. Here's the zoning matrix showing the existing and proposed lot areas and frontages for both properties. As noted previously, 1697 Heron Drive's existing frontage would be considered legal non-complying at 28.1 meters, and that would not change as a result of the approval of this boundary adjustment. The boundary adjustment would not be considered development under the PPS, as no new lot is being created. However, it's important to ensure that the proposed boundary adjustment will not prohibit future growth potential of these properties or the surrounding properties if services were ever to come to Fesserton in the future. And similarly with the growth plan, the boundary adjustment would not increase development potential to either lot. The character of the community would be maintained. And as Emily mentioned, a scoped EIS was prepared, which determined that there will be no negative impact to the mapped unevaluated wetlands on the subject property. The proposed consent will ensure that the mapped unevaluated wetlands will be maintained wholly on each parcel, ensuring no fragmentation of features. This is in keeping with the general intent and purpose of the county official plan in regards to resource management. And as you can see here with the wetlands shown in the blue, the lot line does not intersect with those wetlands. As mentioned previously, both properties are currently developed to their highest and best density, and should partial or full services become available to the community in the future, it is Morgan Planning and Development's opinion that the resulting lot fabric would not prevent future development opportunities for either lot. Section C 1.6 of the Township's OP states that development and site alteration shall not be permitted on lands adjacent to natural features and ecological wetlands. Ecological functions, including provincially significant wetlands and other wetlands. And as we mentioned, that this application is not considered development, but given that no development or site alteration is proposed, a scoped EIS was completed by TerraStory Environmental, which concluded that the proposed lot configuration will not negatively impact these features. To conclude, the boundary adjustment will permit existing uses to continue and better average the land holdings between the two properties. Morgan Planning and Development feel the application conforms and complies with all levels of applicable planning legislation and represents good land use planning. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Victoria and I are available to answer any questions regarding the application. We would kindly ask that you approve the application before you this evening.
Thank you very much. Are there any persons who have either questions or wish to speak in favor or in opposition to the application? There are, please address your questions through me. And I don't believe there's anybody here that has any questions. Is there anybody remotely that has questions?
Thank you, Chair. We had one attendee register via Zoom. Mr. Tang, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to unmute yourself now.
No, I have no questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So if that's it, if there are no further questions or comments, I declare the public portion of the application closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on this application? Seeing none, we've read the conditions and I don't believe there's any further comments. There's no other further committee discussion, or can I call for a motion? So I've just received a motion identified as COA 2023-03, moved by member Jones, second by member Detta, that staff report D23-002 be received and that consent application B-19-22 be provisionally approved, subject to the conditions included within attachment 5 to staff report D22-03. So I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor? Carried. So the hearing for that application is now closed. You are free to stay if you want to, or leave. It's up to you. But we will be moving on. So would township staff briefly introduce the next application identified, or that's for a minor variance identified as A-34-22.
Thank you, Chair. The next application is for lands municipally recognized as 3883 Burnside Line for a minor variance. The subject property is located along the eastern side of Burnside Line, just north of the intersection of Burnside Line and Division Road East and West. The lands are currently zoned estate residential along a haul route. The property has been developed with a single detached dwelling and detached garage. The lands are directly adjoined by other residential uses and are not located with any mapped aggregate reserves, despite being located along a haul route. This is the picture of the existing dwelling as well as the surrounding residential uses. The applicants propose to reconstruct the existing dwelling, utilizing the exact existing footprint and size. As much of the existing dwelling was not in a safe condition to be maintained, the applicants are requesting the following minor variances to facilitate the like-for-like reconstruction of the dwelling. Although a reduction from the required setbacks, the proposed footprint is the same as the existing footprint and does maintain a 20-meter setback from the actual traveled portion of the road. Public Works does indicate that Burnside Line is already at its full 30-meter road allowance, so it is unlikely that Burnside Line would ever be further expanded. So the specific minor variances requested are indicated on the screen here and are described within the staff report. Essentially, they are seeking reduced front yard setbacks as well as a reduced setback to the haul route. On the screen now is the proposed site plan. It is a little hard to see in here, but this is the footprint of the existing dwelling that would maintain the exact same size and location. This is the existing detached garage located on the subject property. So in the context of applicable policy, there are sort of two key considerations that were examined throughout the staff report. One being a key hydrologic feature that traverses the rear of the property. It's not pictured here, but it essentially flows along here. It's a small stream. The other feature being the relationship between the residence and the haul route. As noted within the report, the application is strictly seeking to continue the existing residential use of the lands and would not result in a further increase development on the property. The proposed reconstruction would maintain the exact footprint and size as already exists. In accordance with the provincial policy, the reconstruction is proposed to occur in the already developed area in the existing building cluster. So that's kind of pictured here on the site plan on the screen. Therefore, no reduction in existing setbacks or changes to the use or development on the lot would result from this application. As a result, no further impacts to the features being the trees or the stream are anticipated to result from the application. So these are some photos from the site inspection. As you can see on the screen, the lands are well vegetated with dense mature trees that completely surround the property and the dwelling. These essentially act as a natural buffer between the development and the stream at the rear of the property, and is also valuable for noise and dust mitigation from that heavily traveled haul route. As depicted on the photo on the screen here, the location of the dwelling does appear to maintain a balance between the natural and infrastructural interests. So this is, you can kind of see all the vegetation that would buffer the dwelling from other existing land uses, with mature trees here, providing a buffer between the feature at the rear of the lands and the house. And again, it does appear to provide a sort of balance in between interests on the property. To ensure that the lands are protected and the reciprocal impacts be mitigated between the residential, natural, and the haul route uses, planning staff recommend that a development agreement be entered into and registered on title to protect that existing vegetation on the property. And sort of limit any further impacts beyond the scope of this application, for any further development beyond the scope of this application to prevent any impacts. It is a standard consideration to also require the installation of a central air conditioning unit along heavily traveled roads such as a haul route. This is just to ensure that dust and noise don't negatively impact the residential use, just to allow those exterior doors and windows to remain closed if required. So this is the elevation drawings. Again, their applicants are proposing a dwelling of the same size and the exact same footprint. There'd be no changes to the property. It is also noted that the requested setbacks are consistent with dwellings along this portion of Burnside line. The dwellings that immediately joined to the north and south of the house all have the same sort of setbacks that are requested. The unique topography and characteristics of the lot do require consideration of a balance between the natural features at the rear of the lands and the haul route along the front. Subject to that recommended condition, the requested variance does appear to satisfy the applicable policy and meet the tests detailed within Section 45 of the Planning Act. The no comments or objections were received from the building division or fire and emergency services. Public Works further notes no objections to the application. It does maintain the existing footprint, driveway, and setback, so they do not have any concerns with it. So that being said, planning staff have no objections to the provisional approval of the application, subject to those conditions within the staff report. So those just being the standard conditions of municipal taxes paid to date, that the construction is in substantial compliance with the application, and then the requirement for the development agreement pursuant to Section 49 or 45 of the Planning Act to establish the protection of that existing vegetation, provide for additional plantings where needed, and then that requirement of the central air conditioning here. Silt fencing just to ensure that that stream at the rear of the property is protected during construction. A warning clause that the property is located along a haul route, just so that way any future potential purchasers are made aware that the property is along a haul route, and that the agreement be registered on title. But that is all I have to speak to this application this evening, but available for any questions.
Thank you. Does the applicant or his or her agent have anything further to add to the application? No. Okay. Perfect. So we'll move on. Are there any persons who have either questions or wish to speak in favor or in opposition to the application? There's nobody here. That's good. Nobody online. So if there are no further questions or comments, I declare the public portion of the meeting closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on this application? Seeing none. We've gone through the conditions already. We have no other committee discussion. I'm going to call for a motion. So I have a motion before me that's identified as COA 2023-004, moved by member Jones, second by member Detta, that staff report D23-004 be received, and that minor variance application A-34-22 be provisionally approved, subject to the conditions included within attachment 5 of staff report D23-004. And a call for a vote. All those in favor? Carried. So you're free to go if you so wish. So moving forward, would township staff briefly introduce the application and report on any written response to the notice circulated for application for minor variance identified as A-36-22.
Thank you, Chair. Our next minor variance is A-36-22 for lands located at 3252 Loon Lane. Here we have a key map of the subject property showing it in red. It is located on the eastern shores of Gloucester Pool and is accessed via a series of private roads. The 2022 aerial imagery again outlines the subject lands in red. The existing development on the property includes a detached dwelling, a boathouse, and along with 2 tent storage structures. And there's also a deck that is attached to the dwelling. In speaking with the applicant, the 2 existing tent structures would be removed and their contents relocated to the proposed garage. So the application does seek a minor variance for an increased lot coverage to facilitate the construction of an attached 1-story private garage. As mentioned, the lands are located on Gloucester Pool, and there's no vegetation removal required to facilitate the construction of this attached private garage. So the township zoning bylaw does permit a maximum lot coverage of 15% for lots in the shoreline residential 3 zone. And with this application, the applicant has requested an increased coverage of 18% to facilitate the construction. Here we have the site plan, just 2 of the same images. One's just zoomed in a little bit more. So overall on the property, you have Gloucester Pool down here, the boathouse, the storage structure, the dwelling and the attached deck, along with the proposed attached garage here. And then there's some servicing infrastructure, so being the septic and the well to the rear of the property here. On this zoom in, you can see the proposed garage in relation to the side lot line. This setback exceeds what is required. 1.5 meters is the required setback, and the applicant is actually proposing 2.25 meters for this setback. Here we just have some site photos when staff attended site. The first one here is taken just standing in front of that boathouse on property, looking back towards the rear of the lot. This is the location here where that proposed garage would be constructed. And this photo here is just kind of taken from the opposite view, looking from the driveway down towards the water. And basically where this pickup truck is parked is where that attached garage would be added to the house. Here we have just the elevation drawings of that attached garage. As you can see, the applicant has included a garage door on each side of the building, so it would allow for access into that front yard through the garage, even in consideration of the 2.25 meter setback to the side there. And I also did want to note to the committee that this proposed garage does comply with the maximum required height. So it is 5 meters or less done. So as detailed within the staff report, there is no removal of any shoreline vegetation proposed through this application. This garage is set back more than 30 meters to the shoreline. So the protections to the shoreline are there, just built into this application with that setback. It does maintain an appropriate balance of natural open space with the built form so that the lands are not overdeveloped. And there is mature vegetation along the interior lot line, which does act to buffer this development to the neighboring properties. There were no objections received from the circulation of this application. And the Planning and Development Department has no objections to the approval of this minor variance, subject to the recommended conditions, which may look a little bit unique to the committee. There is no development agreement recommended, despite this being shoreline development. But because that garage is set back more than 30 meters to the water, staff are satisfied that those protections for the water body and the shoreline buffer would be maintained through this application without the agreement. So these conditions are just that taxes be paid, the construction is in substantial compliance with the plan submitted with the application, and that the existing vegetation be preserved and enhanced as much as possible. So that concludes my presentation. I do have a recommended motion for committee, should you wish to see. Thanks.
Okay. Is the applicant or his or her agent have anything further to add to the application? Are you here tonight, Mr. Amos?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. No, I have nothing to add. The only thing I thought I heard was, did he say that there were portable structures on the property?
I'll pass it through to the township staff.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, when we were on site, we did notice that there were some tent structures on the property, but in speaking with the applicant, it advised that they would be removed.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear that, Mr. Amos?
It's definitely going to be. It's definitely going to be removed.
Okay, sounds good. Is there anything further you'd like to add? Is there anything further you'd like to add?
No, that's.
Okay, we're having some internet issues, but I think we're good there. Are there any persons who have either questions or wish to speak in favor or in opposition to the application? There are. Please address your questions through me. There's nobody here, and I believe there's nobody online. So if there's no further questions or comments, I declare the public portion of the application closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on this application? Seeing none, I'm going to move on. We've gone through the conditions already. There's no other further committee discussion. I'm going to call for a motion. So motion, Committee of Adjustment 2023-05. Moved by member Banks, second by member Jones, that the staff report D23-004 be received, and further that minor variance application A-36-22 be approved, subject to the conditions included in as attachment 5 to staff report D23-004. I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor? Carried. So the hearing for this application is now closed. You are free to stay for the remainder of the meeting or leave as you wish. So I'm going to move on in our agenda for this evening. So we don't have any other applications, but we do have a report from an official. So I'm going to ask township staff to discuss the application for certificates of validation identified as B-14-21 and B-15-21.
Thank you, Chair. So these applications may be familiar to the committee. They were considered in November of 2021, so a little over a year ago. As part of that application, when the committee considered these, there was a condition that the committee imposed requiring that the certificates of validation be attached to the deed of the property, and essentially the certificates of validation are done to clear a clouded title situation. So one of the conditions was that the certificates be attached to the deed of the property, When the applicant tried to satisfy that condition, the land registry office advised that they would not allow that type of registration to occur. So at the request of the applicant's agent, Mr. Kirby, a request is being brought forward for the reconsideration of these applications to consider their approval without that condition included on the committee's decision. Township staff have discussed this proposal with our solicitor, who is in agreement with the application this evening as presented, and township staff have no concerns with the approval subject to the recommended conditions. Those conditions have been simplified for this application compared to what was presented back in November of 2021. Those conditions now just be that a legal description of the subject lands be valid, to be validated, be provided to the Secretary Treasurer. Any fees and disbursements, if any incurred by the township, shall be paid for by the owner, and that the municipal taxes be paid in full to the date of requested issuance of the certificates. So essentially this application as presented today has no different purpose or effect than what the committee previously considered. All it is doing is just simplifying the conditions to a point where the applicant is actually able to satisfy them. So there really is no change to the application other than those conditions.
Thank you. Is Mr. Kirby with us this evening? Yeah, Mr. Kirby, do you have anything further to add to the application or to the report?
Can you hear me okay? Excuse
me.
We
can hear you. Yep.
There's nothing. I know it's conventional for consent certificates to be registered by way of a conveyance. In fact, they have to be perfected. So it's not the case with validation certificates. In fact, as I think township staff pointed out, the transfer by which we had tried to quote unquote perfect the severance was returned because it violated the land registry office's own policies with respect to it. All we would like is the validation certificate without any conditions that require registration on title for which there's no provision by the land registry office. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Because there'll be no public portion to this application, so I'm just going to pivot. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on this application? Seeing that there's none, I'm going to call for a motion because we've already read through the conditions. Do I have do I have a seconder? Okay, I have a motion identified as COA 2023-006, moved by member Banks, second by member Jones, that staff report D23-005 be received, and further that consent application B-14-21 and B-15-21 be provisionally approved, subject to the conditions included as attachment 2 to staff report D23-005. So I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor? Carried. So I believe that concludes our meeting this evening. There's no other correspondence, and I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn this meeting. So I have a motion identified as COA 2023-007, moved by member Detta, second by member Jones, that the Committee of Adjustment be adjourned at 7:39 p.m. on Tuesday, January 17th, 2023. And I call for a vote. All those in favor? Carried. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.